everyone. I'm CA Surbhi Punshi, Indirect Tax Expert at Clear Tax, and today we all gathered here to understand about the e-invoicing. And I could see that as every one of you are already responding, so which means you all are able to hear me. So we are going to start our today's session, which is basically on the e-invoicing. So we are going to understand like to whom this e-invoicing is even applicable, who are the taxpayer, like who are required to generate invoicing, what sort of document on which this invoicing is even required. So we are going to discuss about all of this thing in detail in today's session. So now if we just talk about the first and the important thing, right, whether this invoicing and to whom this invoicing is even applicable, let me just present my screen. So here, if we just talk about this e-invoicing, the first and the foremost question which comes into everyone's mind is what exactly we mean by e-invoicing. Today also we some sort of generate the invoice. Now question is then obviously we make the invoice digitally also, whether that becomes an e-invoice, which means if I make an invoice over the cloud, whether that becomes an e-invoice. Right? So there's a lot of question which always keeps on coming up and bumping on our mind, like what exactly we mean by this e-invoicing. So here the government they come up with a concept where they clearly say that today if I am a taxpayer and if I'm generating a normal invoice, it could be a hard copy, it could be the invoice which you're generating on an Excel, it could be that maybe you're using any ERP solution for generating an invoice. It's a different tools which you're using to just generate a normal invoice. And obviously in that invoice, we just write our detail, which is seller detail. We write the buyer's detail. We write the item details, which would be maybe what is HSN, what is the quantity, what is taxable value, what is tax rate, what is tax amount. So we enter some sort of information and then give that invoice to a final customer. Right? That is what we do today. Now question is then what we mean by e-invoice over here. Here government says see as you do today, as you generate invoice today, you have to follow the same step. There is no change over there. But the important point which we should always keep in our mind is that when we are doing that information, then we also have to give the same information to the IRP, which is Invoice Registration Portal. So we have to submit some sort of information to the Invoice Registration Portal. Then this Invoice Registration Portal will check whether the information given by you is correct or not, whether you are the registered person or not, whether the customer GST which you have mentioned is it valid or not, whether the pin code which you have mentioned it is actually coming in the state which you have mentioned for the customer, whether HSN you mentioned was valid or not, the item details which you have mentioned whether it's good or not, whether the taxable value into tax is equivalent to tax amount or not, or the sum of all the taxable value plus tax amount is it equal to invoice value or not. So they are going to do some sort of validation. And if they feel that yes, everything is perfectly okay, you have given everything good, and then they will also check whether this invoice was not given earlier to them. In that particular case, if every information was passed, then in return they will be giving you a invoice reference number, which is known as IRN. So they will be giving you an IRN number, and then you have to print that IRN on top of the invoice which you are issuing along with one QR code, and that QR code will also be received by you from there itself, where on scanning that you will know okay what was the invoice number, what was the customer GST, and what is your GST. So some information you are going to get on top of that. But this was just a basic understanding what we mean by invoicing. So in short, we just said that if a normal invoice is registered on an NIC portal, that becomes an invoice, right? But we want to first understand whether me as a taxpayer, to me this invoicing is even applicable or not. Then only I want to understand what does exactly mean by this, right? So we want to understand about all of this thing. So government they come up with the concept of this e-invoicing from 1st October 2020. That was the first time when they come up with this concept of e-invoicing, where they have made mandatory for the taxpayer whose turnover was more than 500 crore. So they have mandatory that you have to generate this e-invoice, right? So on from especially from 1st October 2020, government have made e-invoicing mandatory in case our turnover is more than 500 crore, right? Then further they reduce this limit. Obviously the government want to eventually make sure that this e-invoicing is applicable to every person. Right? So that was their need. Then further they reduced this limit to 100 crore, and that was reduced on 1st Jan 2021. So from 1st Jan 2021, in case your aggregate turnover was more than 100 crore, then this e-invoicing was applicable to you. Then further again they reduce this limit. So finally, when we look into 1st April 2021, so if your turnover was more than 50 crore, in that case, e-invoicing is applicable to you from 1st April 2021. So which means whosoever turnover was greater than 50 crore, this e-invoicing was applicable from 1st April 2021. But obviously government didn't stop there, right? Then they further reduced this limit to 20 crore. So which means from 1st April 2022, from in case your aggregate turnover is greater than 20 crore, then that case e-invoicing is applicable to you. Okay, then we're like, okay, is that a final limit? Do we have to even look after that? Then finally, again, government came and they said, now I want to further reduce this limit of 20 crore to 10 crore. And they again reduced this limit of 20 crore to 10 crore from 1st October 2022. Which means if your aggregate turnover is greater than 10 crore, in that particular case, this e-invoicing is applicable to you from 1st October 2022. Now question is this the final limit? Whether the government have reduced this further or it is still the same, right? So here the government says, wait, I want to reduce it further. So finally, when we look into this, today, if you ask me, from 1st of, especially August, right? From 1st August 2023, in case your aggregate turnover is greater than 5 crore, in that particular case, e-invoicing is applicable to you. So which means now this 10 crore limit has been further reduced to 5 crore, and that is applicable from 1st August 2023. So in case your aggregate turnover is exceeding 5 crore, in that particular case, this e-invoicing is applicable to you from 1st August 2023. So that's the final limit. But okay, we are like, okay, you are anyhow talking about something called aggregate turnover, but our first bigger question is what exactly we mean by aggregate turnover, right? When we are saying that, okay, I have to generate this e-invoicing, there is a need of generating IRN number. And in that particular case, we have to generate only when my aggregate turnover exceed a threshold limit. And now our threshold limit has been reduced to 5 crore. The question is what exactly we mean by aggregate turnover here, right? Let me, before even answering that, let me ask this question from you, and maybe you try to answer me, and maybe you can try to answer some of the part, and you tell me whether this is actually, will this become even part of my aggregate turnover or not, right? And I could see Nilashu says if when we can actually ask a question. Nilashu, you can actually keep on posting your all the queries. So I will keep on taking all the queries which are posting on the chat box. So we'll do that, right? Now the question is what exactly we mean by aggregate turnover over here, right? Let me ask you. I supply to a registered person. I have done some sale, right? And I supply to a registered person. My question to all of you is whether the supplies which I have done to a registered person, whether that forms part of my aggregate turnover or not. I supply to a registered person, which is a B2B document. The question is whether that forms part of my aggregate turnover or not. I could see answer from Devendra. Devendra says yes. Ripul says yes. Ronak says yes. Yes says yes. Shubhang says yes. Okay, so everyone is saying yes, which is actually the right answer. So you all says that all my B2B documents, whenever I'm supplying to a registered person, whenever I'm selling to a registered person, that forms part of my aggregate turnover, which is actually the right answer, right? Let me ask you another question. You supply to an unregistered person. You have done B2C supplies. You supply to an unregistered person, which means now in this particular case, my customer is not registered. It is also possible, right? I can always supply to unregistered person. Question is whether that forms part of my aggregate turnover or not. Maybe you can apply on the chat box. I have supplied to an unregistered person, whether that will form part of my aggregate turnover or not. I could see answer from Tripul says yes, Pravesh says yes, Kalandar says yes, Mohan says yes, Shubhang says yes, Rashik says yes, Indu says yes. So everyone is saying yes. In case of all your B2C supplies also, aggregate turnover is included, right? So when we look into aggregate turnover, the B2C supplies are also included in the definition of aggregate turnover. Now the next question. You have supplied the exempted supplies. Now what you have done? You have done some exempted supplies, right? So which means you are issuing a bill of supply. We all understand that whenever we do the exempt supplies, in such case we issue the bill of supply, right? Whenever I'm doing some exempt supply, let's say there were certain goods I have to sold, but obviously the tax rate was 0%. I don't have to pay tax on top of that. The question is whether when I'm issuing a bill of supply, which means I'm doing certain exempt supplies in that particular case, whether that will be included in the definition of aggregate turnover or not. Right? I could see answer from Mohan. Mohan says yes. Hindu says yes. He says no. Priti says yes. Shan says yes. Arun says yes. Venkat says yes. Vasudev says yes. Everyone is saying yes. When it comes to the exempt supplies also, that is actually included in the definition of aggregate turnover, and actually that's the correct answer. So if you ask me today whether my exempt supplies form parts of my aggregate turnover or not, the answer is yes. My exempt supply also form part of my aggregate turnover. So whenever I am considering this limit of 5 crore, in that particular case, I also have to include my exempt supplies, right? Okay, now the next question. We said, okay, B2B, yes, we should include. B2C, you said, yes, we should include. I talked about exempt supply, you said, yes, we should include. What about my export supply? I am doing certain exports. It could be with payment or it could be under LUT also, with which it's without payment of IGST. The question is exports, whether it's with or without payment of IGST, whether that is included in the definition of my aggregate turnover or not. Because the answer from Kalandar says yes, Hindu says yes, Ranjit says yes, Shan says yes, Pavesh says yes, Dhananjay says yes. So everyone again saying yes. The particular export transaction, whenever you're talking about export, that also forms my part of my aggregate turnover. So which means yes, that is also included in the definition of turnover. Right? So we all said that B2B, whether it's a B2B or it's a B2C or it's exempt supply or it's an export transaction, every will form part of my aggregate turnover, which is actually the correct answer. But I have some other question. You did a B2B supply. It's a normal B2B supply. But this time I was not liable to pay the taxes. Rather, the recipient was liable to pay the taxes. I was a registered person. Customer was also a registered person. I did a normal B2B invoice. I raised a normal B2B invoice also, which is a normal tax invoice. Question is, in this particular case, in this example, what happened? I was not liable to pay the taxes, right? So I as a supplier was not liable to pay the taxes. Rather, recipient was liable to pay the taxes under reverse charge. My question to all of you, whether in this particular case, this transaction will be included in the definition of my aggregate turnover or not. Here, the recipient was liable to pay the taxes, though it's by B2B supply, which means B2B sales itself, whether this transaction will be included in the definition of my aggregate turnover or not. I could see answer from Ravinder says yes, yes says no, Rashik says yes, Trupal says supply and ASIM are not considered, Pavi says yes, Ranjay says yes, Kailash says yes, Kailash, okay. Everyone is saying yes. In case of my B2B transaction, even if I am liable to pay the taxes under reverse charge, that is actually included in the definition of aggregate turnover. So if you ask me whether this is included or not, answer is yes, even because it's actually my outward supply I'm selling. That doesn't matter whether I was liable to pay the taxes under under normal charge, or my recipient was liable to pay the taxes under reverse charge. So in this particular case also, I have to pay. So even if I don't have to pay the taxes under reverse charge, this is actually included in the definition of aggregate turnover. So I have to include this as a part of my aggregate turnover. Now the next question is, I talked about all outward supplies, right? Now what happens is, this is my purchases this time. I purchase something, right? I have to purchase something, I purchase, but in this case, I was liable to pay the taxes under reverse charge. Assume I availed some legal services from an unregistered person and I was liable to pay the taxes under reverse charge. My question to all of you, whether this transaction will be considered in the definition of this aggregate turnover or not. I purchased something from maybe an unregistered person or could be a registered person, and I was liable to pay the taxes under reverse charge in this transaction, whether this will be included in the definition of aggregate turnover or not. I could see answer from Kalandar says no, Tripul says no, Vasudev says no, Lalit says no, Rasik says no, Shiva says no, Moish says no, Pooja says. So everyone is saying no over here, which is actually the right answer. Because this is my inward supplies and not the outward supply. Whenever I talk about my aggregate turnover, that's my outward supply. Whenever I'm selling, that becomes part of my aggregate turnover, not my purchases. My purchases are not part of the aggregate turnover, so it's always my outward supply, and it is irrespective whether I was liable to pay tax or not, doesn't matter. If it's my outward supply, then yes, it will be included in the definition of my aggregate turnover. Be it my B2B or a B2C or an export or an exempted supply, it doesn't matter. Everything forms part of my aggregate turnover. Right? I think till now we are clear that what all actually includes in the part of aggregate turnover. But the next important point over here is that when we're saying aggregate turnover, let's say I have my three GSTNs. One GSTN was in Karnataka, one GSTN was in Delhi, and another GSTN was in Maharashtra. So I have my three GSTN. Now the question is that when I'm looking into this aggregate turnover, do I have to do or I have to check this at a PAN level, or I have to check only for a GSTN? Do I have to check this at a PAN level, or I have to do this only at a GSTN level? So when I'm looking into my this aggregate turnover, should I always compute at a PAN level? And if at a PAN level, let's assume it exceeds the threshold limit, then it is applicable for all my GSTN, or I have to check for always the respective GSTN. So I could see answer from Devendra. Devendra says it should be under one PAN. Pravesh says under PAN level. Ravindra says PAN level. Sunil says PAN level. Malikaran says PAN level. Okay, Naveen says yes. Indu says PAN level. Ashik says, is it based on PAN level? Tripul says having PAN level. So everyone is saying this is at a PAN level, which is again the correct answer. It is always has to be checked at a PAN level, right? I will actually give you one example and you try to answer that what will happen in this particular case. Right? Assuming you are in on 1st of August, assuming now right now the threshold limit of this particular thing is 5 crore, right? You assume that. So which means e-invoicing is applicable to you. Now what had happened? You have some turnover. Let's assume you started your business in Delhi recently, and you had a turnover of, let's say, 20 lakh rupees over there, right? You have one branch. You have, obviously, that is also registered. It has a separate GST number, and you have one branch in Karnataka. In Karnataka, your total turnover, which is aggregate turnover, is, let's assume it's 2 crore, right? In Karnataka, total turnover was 2 crore. And there was a new branch which was launched, which was in Delhi, and you took a separate registration for Delhi, and the total turnover over there was 20 lakh rupees. My question to all of you, in this particular case, whether I am liable to generate the e-invoicing only for Delhi or only for maybe Karnataka, or I was liable to generate e-invoicing for both the states. Whether I am liable to generate e-invoicing for Karnataka, Delhi, or both the state. If you all can answer. I will see answer from Arun. Arun says both the states. Shan says both the states. Ashik says in all the places. Tripul says both. Moin says both the state. Komal says invoicing for all. Vasudeva says both. Ranjit says both. So everyone is saying yes, we are required to generate this invoicing for both the state, and which is again the correct answer. So whenever we are looking into this aggregate turnover, we always have to check at a PAN level, and if it exceeds, so when if it exceeds the threshold limit at a PAN level, in that particular case, this e-invoicing is applicable to all of the states, right? So this is one important point which we should always understand, that when it comes to e-invoicing, we have to always check at a PAN level, and if at a PAN level it has exceeded the threshold limit, in such case it is applicable for all of your state, right? So this is one important point which we should always keep in our mind. Now the next question is, because I was talking about, I think till now we understood, okay, this has to be checked at PAN level. We have to consider all the outward supply, including your exempt supplies and all. Now, the next part is that when again we were talking about this aggregate turnover, right? So, another important point is that if we talk about this aggregate turnover, right? So, what about the cases where we are saying that, okay, we have the same PAN number, we agreed on that, whether this tax amount, so see, whenever I sold, right, let's say I've done a sale of 1 lakh rupees, obviously I charge some GST also. So I charge a GST of 18,000. So should I include only 1 lakh, or should I include 1 lakh 80,000 while I am computing this aggregate turnover? I could see answer from Naveen. Naveen says only taxable value. What about others? Karandar says 1 lakh rupees. Rupal says 1 lakh rupees. Dhananjay says we should not include GST. Lalit says 1 lakh. Pravesh says 1. So everyone is saying 1 lakh, which is again the right answer. So here we again have to be sure that we are not including the taxes. And when I'm saying taxes, the taxes include only the central tax, state tax, union tax, integrated tax, and cess. We are not talking about the other kinds of taxes. If there are other taxes other than this, then that has to be included. But when it comes to the aggregate turnover, we will not include the taxes which has been charged under the GST. Right? So this is something which we should always keep in our mind. Now, talking about all this thing, right? We said, okay, we'll include all this thing, all this transition, all the outward supply. But again, next important question comes in that when we're looking into this aggregate turnover, for which year we should even look into the aggregate turnover? Let's say, assuming that invoicing is applicable to me from 1st of August, should I look into the aggregate turnover of my previous financial year, which is 22-23? Or should I look into my aggregate turnover for FY 23-24, which is the current year, which means still maybe August? Or should I look into the aggregate turnover for my previous year? Maybe you all can try to answer that when I'm looking into this, when I'm looking into this aggregate turnover, should I restrict myself to only look into the previous year, which is my last year? Or should it be my current year? Or should it be like my previous to previous year? Like what actually I should look for when I'm looking for the aggregate turnover? So I could see the answer here. So Sunil says it's financial year 2017-18. Dhananjay says previous year. Venkat says previous year. Hindu says from 2017. Ravinder says from 22-23. CS says any last 5 year. Kalanda says all year from July 2017. Shakti says 2017. So I am getting different answers over here. So if you ask me in that particular case, I say that here the government actually have come up with a proper clarification. So they says if in any of the year, till obviously a previous year, if in any of the years starting from 2017, if your aggregate turnover exceeds this threshold limit, in that particular case, you have to register, and which means you have to get registered yourself in the e-invoicing portal, and you have to start generating the IRN number. Which means, let's assume that last year, which is previous year, which is 22-23, assuming your turnover was just 4 crore, right? But let's say in 1920, FY 1920, your total turnover was 12 crore. In that particular case, you are required to generate the invoicing for each and every invoices which you issued from 1st August 2023. Right? So this is how we have to look into this. So which means when we are looking into this limit, we have to check in any of the years starting from 2017. If in any of the year your aggregate turnover exceeds this threshold limit, in such case you are required to generate this e-invoicing. But the next important question which always keeps on our mind is that all right, we understood that we have to check from 2017, and in any year if this get exceed, I have to generate this invoicing. But what if, let's say, in any of the year till my FY 22-23, this turnover has not exceeded. I always have the turnover of, let's say, 4.5 crore. Now my question is, let's say finally on 31st July, my aggregate turnover has become 7 crore. Till my previous financial year, it was always under 5 crore. It was never exceeded. But on 31st July 2023, finally my aggregate turnover has exceeded this limit of 5 crore. Whether I am required to generate e-invoicing from 1st August in that case or not. I would say answer from Rasi. Rasi says it's not applicable in FY 22-23. Naveen says you have to. Hindu says next year from April. Ravinder says yes. Dhananjay says no. Shakti says yes. Sharik says not applicable. Venkat says no. Umesh says yes. So I'm getting different answers over here. So if you ask me this question, I would say that you are not required to generate this e-invoicing from 1st August 2023. Rather, you are required to generate this e-invoicing from the next year, which is from 1st April 2024. So you will be required to generate the e-invoicing, but that will be applicable only from 1st April 2024 and not from 1st of August 2023. So whenever we are checking for this turnover limit, right, which is the aggregate turnover limit, we have to check from 2017 till my last, which is last previous year, right? So in our example, if today I'm checking my limit, I have to check this till my 31st March 2023, which is financial year 22-23. That is what I will be checking. If aggregate turnover has exceeded in any of the year from 2017 till 22-23, In such case, I will be required to generate this e-invoicing. But if you had not exceeded in any of the year, then it is not applicable from 1st August 2023. But maybe if, let's say, in this year 23-24 year, if it exceeds, then maybe from 1st April it will be applicable, right? So this is something which we should again keep on our mind, that when we are looking at this aggregate turnover, for which year we have to even check for, right? So that's like another important point. Now we actually have understood, right? So what we were saying, that in short, when we talk about aggregate turnover, what exactly we mean by that? So it means that the aggregate value of all of your taxable supply, excluding the value of inward supply. So it is not including inward supplies over here, which means it's not including your purchases over here, on which tax is payable by a person on a reverse charge basis. It includes your exempt supplies, it includes your export of goods or the services, it includes all your interstate supplies having the same permanent account number, which means having the same PAN number. So it has to be computed always at a PAN number, but it excludes your central tax, state tax, union territory tax, and integrated tax and cess, which means it does not include the other taxes which you have paid under the GST. This is what we mean by aggregate turnover. Now we understood one part, right? We understood that, okay, if in case my aggregate turnover exceeds the threshold limit of 5 crore in any of the year, which is starting from FY 2017 till my FY 20, I would say 22-23, if in any of the year this has exceeded the threshold limit, in such case this e-invoicing is applicable. But we always have another important question. We always keep on hearing that, all right, I got it that if aggregate turnover exceeded a PAN level, then yes, I'm liable to generate. But is there any exemption given to me? As we have seen in e-way bill, right? So when I have to generate e-way bill, there's a limit. There's a limit of 50K over there. Some places there's a limit of 1 lakh rupees over there. The question is whether there's a limit in terms of e-invoicing. Is there any threshold limit that, okay, if invoice value is less than this, I don't have to generate e-invoicing? Or maybe there's a limit in certain cases that maybe it is not applicable to some of the people. Is there certain sort of exemptions or not? Right? That's like a next important question which always keeps on coming. So here, first assumption, so we know if our aggregate turnover does not exceed 5 crore ka limit, then obviously e-invoicing is not applicable to us. But yes, there are certain other exemptions which government have given. So they say this e-invoicing is applicable to a registered taxpayer whose turnover exceeds this 5 crore ka limit in respect of the supply of goods or services or both to a registered person. But there are certain exceptions which they have given. And if you ask me what are that exemptions, so they say if you are SCZ, which means you are a special economic zone ka unit, in that particular case, if you are a business, right, if I'm SCZ unit, I'm not liable to generate e-invoicing at all. If I'm an insurer, or I'm a banking company, or I'm an NBFC, or I'm a GTA, or I'm a supplier of passenger transport services, or I'm a supplier of services by way of admission to exhibition of films in a multiplex city, or maybe I'm an OIDAR. In all of such cases, this e-invoicing is not applicable to me. So which means if I'm in a business of, maybe I'm an insurance company, or I'm an NBFC, or I'm a GTA, in such case, e-invoicing is not applicable to me. So today, if you ask me if I'm a GTA, right, whether I'm liable to generate IRN number for all my B2B documents, answer comes no. For GTA, this e-invoicing is not applicable. If I'm into a business of passenger transport service, this e-invoicing is not applicable. If I'm into an insurance business, this e-invoicing is not applicable. If I'm a bank, e-invoicing is not applicable. So there are certain criteria where the government says if you are into this business, that this e-invoicing is not applicable to you, right? So that's another important point. Yes, there are certain exemptions. So if I'm into this business, which is listed and which you can see on your screen also, if I'm into this business, then in such case, this e-invoicing is not applicable to me. Now the next important point. We understood that, okay, when this e-invoicing is not applicable. So in short, the government says if you are a registered person, which means I'm a regular registered person, if my aggregate turnover has exceeded this threshold limit of 5 crore, in such case, this e-invoicing is applicable. But if I'm into this business, then yes, it is not applicable to me, right? So this means there is certain exemption, and these are the type of business to whom this exemption have been given. Now the next point was, all right, I'm not into this business. I'm not an SEC. Let's assume I have a company. I'm into the pharma company, or maybe I'm a company. I'm selling garments and all, right? obviously the invoicing is applicable to you provided your threshold limit exceeds the limit of 5 crore. Now, the next important point which will obviously come into our mind is that yes, now finally I got it that my aggregate turnover has exceeded the limit and I'm not into this business. Now, question is for what all documents I am liable to generate this item number? Is it all kind of document? Or the government says no, only for some specific sort of the document this invoicing is applicable, right? For that, the government says yes. When it comes to this e-invoicing documents, right, you are required to generate this e-invoicing only for tax invoice, the debit note, the credit note. You're not required to generate this e-invoicing for bill of supply or the delivery challan. When it comes to the transaction, you are liable to generate the invoicing only for the B2B or the B2G or export documents, right? That is what government says, right? So let me ask you a few queries and maybe you try to answer basis that for what sort of documents I am liable to generate e-invoicing and for what kind of a document I am not liable to generate this e-invoicing. Let me ask you one thing. Let's assume you have raised a tax invoice to a registered person. You raise a tax invoice to a registered person, which means you have issued one B2B document, which is a tax invoice. Whether e-invoicing is applicable or not, whether you are required to generate iron in such case or not. You issued a B2B document with a registered person, whether invoicing is applicable to you or not. I could see answer from Indu. Indu says yes. Ronak says yes. Komal says yes. Triple says yes. Mehu says yes. Everyone is saying yes. You are required to generate the e-invoicing in respect of the B2B tax invoice which I have issued, and which is again the correct answer. Yes, we are required to generate. Let me ask you another question. You sold something to a registered person, but there were certain goods which was defective, and obviously the customer asked me to raise a credit note. So I raised a credit note to that registered person. Question is whether this e-invoicing or the IRN number I am required to generate in respect of that credit note or not. I got the answer from Ravindra says yes, Indu says yes, Freddy says yes, Nilanshu says yes, Pavesh says yes, Ravindra says yes, Shakti says yes. So everyone is again saying yes, we are required to generate the IRN number for the credit note, which is again the correct answer. I have another question. I have supplied to a registered person. It's again a B2B document. I supplied some exempted services or maybe goods to this registered person, right? I supplied this exempted goods or the services to this registered person, whether I am required to generate the item against this document or not. I supplied the exempted goods or services to the registered person, whether I am required to generate the item number or not. I will see answer from Dhananjay says yes, Pavesh says yes, Rajesh says not required, Suril says yes, Ninashu says yes, Shan says no, Dhananjay says yes, Shakti says yes. Okay, most of you are saying yes and some of you are saying no, it's not required. So if you ask me this question, I would say when it comes to exempt supplies, what sort of document we are required to issue? Right? Whenever I am supplying exempt supply, what are the sort of document I am required to issue? The answer would come that I am required to generate the bill of supply in such case, right? In case I am supplying the exempt supplies, I have to raise a bill of supply. And when it comes to bill of supply, I am not required to generate the item number against the bill of supply. So since I'm not required to generate, so here if you ask me, since it's a bill of supply, I'm not required to generate the item against this document. So if I'm doing an exempt supply even to a registered person, I'm not required to generate the item number. Right? So this is the answer to that. Let me ask you another question. Now you have supplied to an unregistered person, which means you have issued a tax invoice to an unregistered person, which is a B2C supply. Question is whether you are required to generate item in this case or not. You have supplied to unregistered person, you issued a tax invoice to unregistered person, whether you're required to generate item or not. I could see answer from Naveen. Naveen says not required. Komal says not required. Nilanshu says no. Shan says no. Dhananjay says no. Rashik says no. Mehul says no. Freddy says yes. Krishna says no. Okay. Most of you are saying no, it is not required, and the answer is right, because when it comes to the e-invoicing generation, we are required to generate the e-invoicing only in respect of our B2B and the export documents. We are not required to generate the e-invoicing in case of our B2C documents. In this case, we are not required to generate the e-invoicing. Now, the next question is, let's say I've done certain export and these exports were done under LUT. I've done certain exports, it could be export of goods, it could be export of services. I've done under the LUT, which means obviously I filed a LUT, which is letter of credit. So I've done export without payment of IGST. Question is whether I'm required to generate the item in respect of this transaction or not. I got the answer from Shakti. Shakti says yes. Trupal says yes. Pavesh says yes. Indu says yes. Ravinder says yes. Srinivas says need to generate. Okay. Komal says yes. Sudhir says yes. So everyone is saying yes, which is again the right answer. So if you ask me in respect of export, whether it's with payment or it's without payment, you are required to generate the item number. So which means we are required to generate the item number in this case also. Now I have another question. We all know about the branch transfer. Right? Now what happened? I had two GSTs, one in the state of Karnataka, another is in the state of Maharashtra. I'm registered in both the places. This is under the same PAN, just two GSTs. I supplied certain goods from my Karnataka GST to Maharashtra GST. My question is, obviously I will issue an invoice also over here. Question is whether I'm required to generate the item in this case or not. I supplied some goods from my Maharashtra GST to Karnataka GST and I raised an invoice. Question is whether I'm required to generate the item in this case or not. I could see answer from Pravesh. Pravesh says yes. Indu says no. Mehul says yes. Dhananjay says not required. Shakti says yes. Lali says no. Venkat says yes. Koma says yes. Branch transfer invoicing is applicable. Ravinder says yes. Okay, so most of you says yes. I think Nilanshu says I don't know. Okay, so if you ask me, the answer comes in because here this is treated as a separate entity. Whenever I supply from my one entity to the another, this is a normal text invoice itself. So it's a text invoice. In this particular case, I am required to generate the item number. So when I supply this goods from the one unit to the another unit, which are in the different state, which have a separate GSTN, in such case, I am required to generate the e-invoicing, right? Because I am here issuing a text invoice. So accordingly, I am also required to generate the item number in this particular case. Now the next question, right? Now what happened? I had two branches in the same state, but I only have one registration. I only have one GSTN in this particular state. Let's say in Karnataka, I have only one GSTN, but I have two branches in the same state. I can always have, right? Let's say one is in HSR, another is in Whitefield, which means one in location A, another is location B. I have two branches under same GSTN. So here in this particular case, what will happen? I obviously have sent certain goods. Let's say there was a laptop I have to deliver. So I sent from my one branch to another branch. Question is whether I'm required to generate e-invoicing in this case or not. So this is under the same GST from one branch to another, whether I'm required to generate the e-invoicing against this transaction or not. I got the answer from Nilanshu. Nilanshu says no, Mehul says no, Shakti says no, Tripal says no, Pravesh says no, Dhananjay says no, Venkat says no. So everybody is saying no, and which is again the right answer. Because if you ask me, in this particular case, we always issue a delivery challan. Whenever I have to transfer the good, this is not considered as my outward supply also. So here in this particular case, this will be considered. Here I am required to raise a delivery challan, and we all know that against the delivery challan, I am not required to generate the invoice. So in such case, I am not required to generate the e-invoicing. Right? So I think this is again clear. Now, next question is that many times you know that there are certain government units, right? Whenever there is a government units, most of the government units, because they don't have to pay any taxes, most of them are exempted. So they don't take a registration as a regular registration. So they don't have to file GST 13B and all. But they have to take one more registration, which is known as tax deductor. So all this government unit take another kind of a registration, which is known as tax deductor. Now the question is, if they take a registration as a tax deductor, in that particular case, they have some GST, but that is not a normal GST. But obviously, when I supply to this PSU, for example, in that particular case, when I supply to this PSU, I will be raising a tax invoice, I will be charging the GST also, and I will be mentioning their tax deductor GST itself. So they will be obviously deducting some TDS and all, and they will be filing GST 7, which later on I can go ahead and claim the ITC. Question is whether again this invoice, the tax invoice which I issue to this PSUs, and they have not taken registration as a regular registration, whether they have taken the registration as a tax deductor, whether I am liable to generate invoicing against this invoice or not. I could see answer from Malikuran says no, Indu says no, Komal says yes, B2G, Mehul says no, Srinivas says no, Shakti says tax invoice. Pooja says no. Venkat Rao says yes. Shakti says B2G. Pravesh says no. Okay, so I'm getting a mixed answers over here. Some of you says yes and some of you says no. So the answer over here is this is considered as a B2G document, which means it's a business to government. So here we are required to generate the invoicing because saying looking into the recipient, right? They are registered, but they are registered as a tax deductor, but still we are required to generate the iron in this particular scenario. So if you ask me whether I'm required to generate iron number or not, the answer comes yes, we are required to generate the iron number. Now let me ask you I would say the next question. There was again sale happen, and I think there we have a lot of confusion. I think it is very important to clarify that part. Again, I am supplying to a registered person. This time I was not liable to pay the tax, rather recipient is liable to pay the taxes. It's a normal B2B tax invoice, but I am not liable to pay the taxes, rather recipient is liable to pay the taxes in this particular transaction. Question is whether I am required to generate the iron in this scenario or not. I raised a normal tax invoice to a registered person, but I am not liable to pay the taxes. Rather, the recipient is liable to pay the taxes, whether I am required to generate the invoicing in this scenario or not. I could see answer from Mehul. Mehul says yes. Shakti says yes. Dhananjay says no. Venkat says yes. Dhananjay says RCM. Shrihari says no. Rakesh says B2B. Komal says no. Tripal says no. Okay. Some of you are saying yes. Some of you are saying is no. So I would say that yes, we are required to generate the invoicing in this case also, because this is treated as a B2B tax invoice. So when it is treated as a B2B tax invoice, it doesn't matter whether I was liable to pay the taxes or the recipient was liable to pay the taxes. In this scenario also, we are required to generate the item number, right? Now let me ask you another question. Now what happened? You had purchased something and you were liable to pay the taxes under reverse charge. You purchase something maybe from an unregistered person, you avail some services from an advocate, and you are liable to pay the taxes under the reverse charge. The question is whether you are required to generate e-invoicing in respect of this transaction or not. So you issued a self-invoice because you purchased from the unregistered person, and obviously that person cannot raise the invoice at all. So you raised a self-invoice in that, and it's your inward supply obviously, and you are liable to pay the tax and reverse charge, whether you are required to generate the item number against this invoice or not. I could see answer from Shakti says no, Dhananjay says yes, Umesh says no, Komal says no, Venkat says no, Mehul says no, Pooja says no, Ravindra says no. So everyone is saying no, most of you. So which means again it's a correct answer. So when it comes to my inward supplies, I'm not liable to generate the item number. When it comes to this e-invoicing concept, right, I'm required to generate the item only in respect of my outward supplies and not my inward supply, right? So I'm required to generate this item number only in respect of my outward supplies and not inward supplies. And in the outward supplies also, I'm required to generate the item only in respect of my B2B or the export documents, or when I'm supplying to the government, right? That is when I'm required to generate the item number. I'm not required to generate the item in respect of my B2C transactions or maybe my exempt supplies. There I'm not required to generate the item number. So which means when it comes to document, it's only tax document or the debit note or the credit note, and delivery challenge and the bill of supplies are not covered over here, right? So this was about to whom e-invoicing is applicable. What are the kind of documents? So if e-invoicing is applicable to me, then for which document should I even generate the item number, right? So that's like another part which we have just covered. Now the question is that, okay, finally we understood that e-invoicing is applicable to us or not. We got it. We also understood that what are the sort of documents for which I am required to generate the item number. But the question is how exactly we have to generate. What is the process for the same, right? So for the process, what happens that there is a obviously seller, because we are talking about all outward supply, which means seller is liable to register on the NIC portal, and that person is required to generate the item number. So what will happen? There would be seller will be generating the invoicing, which is a normal invoice on the ERP and the ASP, right? So normal as they do today also, right? They have to generate this invoice. Then they have to push this information to an IRP, which is known as Invoice Registration Portal. Today we have 4 IRPs, I would say, and there is a NIC IRP. In fact, Clear also have their own IRP. So in fact, Clear has their own IRP. So you have to push this information in a form of a JSON, which is invoice JSON. So you have to push this information to the IRP. Once you push this information, right, they will check the authenticity, they will check whether the validation. So obviously they will run some sort of validation whether everything is correct or not, and this invoice was not earlier generated. Once they feel that okay, this is perfectly okay, everything is working fine, and the information which you have given is good, in that case, in return, they will give you a JSON file which will be known as a digitally signed e-invoicing along with the QR code. So they will give you an IRN number along with the QR code, which you have to print it, and print me you just put that QR code and the IRN number, and you can just give it to the customer. Along with that, what they will also do, because anyhow they already have now entire information, which is they have the invoice number, the invoice date, the customer details, the supplier seller detail, which is your detail. They also have the, I would say, the item level details, which means now they know what is the HSN, what is the taxable value, what is the tax amount, what is the tax rate, what is the invoice value. Now they already have every information, right? So now, obviously, if they have this information, they can even say that okay, now you can even generate e-way bill, right? So if while sending this information to the NIC, you also give them the e-way bill information, right? While sending this information, if you also send them the transportation detail, they will also go ahead and generate the e-way bill, right? So what they will do, they will generate this e-invoicing, and if you also give the transportation detail, then they will also generate the e-way bill, which means they will also send this information to the NIC, and your e-way bill will also be generated automatically at the same time, right? So you don't have to punch this information again on the e-way bill portal. So once you send this information to the NIC, and if you also give the transportation detail, then your e-way bill also will get generated. At the same time, this information will also be auto-populated in your GSTR1. We all know today we file GSTR1, we anyhow have to give this information to the government also, where we give invoice number, invoice date, the tax rate, and the tax amount. So the government says that when anyhow I have this information, so I will autofill this information in this GSTR1 also. So this information will be autofilled over there also. And since now it is now part of your GSTR1, which is draft GSTR1, you will see that this information will be automatically even reflected to the buyer. So buyer will also be able to see this information in their GSTR2B. So they can look into that you as a seller has actually generated the IRN number, and the buyer will also be able to see this information on the T+2 basis, right? So this information will be even applicable to the buyer. Right, so this is how the exact process will be. That which means there would be a seller who will be generating invoice. He will be sending the GSN payload. IRP will like do certain kinds of validation. Then they will push back this information, and we have to again understand that this has to be done on the real time basis. Though the government don't put any restriction on the same, because the next question which always will be in our mind is that though the government don't put any restriction on this, the question is, do I have to do this on a daily basis or on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis? The answer comes in, you have to do this on a daily basis and try to do on the real time basis, because any invoice, if they don't have the IRN number, if e-invoicing was applicable to you, in that particular case, this e-invoicing is not even considered as a valid invoice. For any invoice to be a valid invoice, it should have the proper QR code and the IRN number. If it has that detail, then only it is considered a valid invoice. Otherwise, this is not even treated as a valid invoice, right? So here, because now obviously this we know that this e-invoicing is going to be applicable, the question is how we can just make sure that you don't end up, because this is a real-time activity, you have to generate IRN number, you have to make sure that the government systems are also up at the same time, you're not facing any problem. And before even sending this information to the government, you want to validate everything, whether the information which you're sending is even correct or not, right? So here actually Clear have come up with the solution where we can directly fetch this information from your ERP. So you don't have to do anything manually. On a single click, we directly fetch every information from your ERP. And then we will make sure, because we know that this is required only for the P2P and export document, not for B2C and all. So we auto segregate that. Okay, these are the document which is required for the purpose of IRN number. We auto segregate that. Okay, this is the document for which invoicing or the IRN is required. These are the document for which e-way bill is required. So we auto segregate all these documents, and then we make sure, okay, for this in a single click you will be able to generate IRN number. These are the documents for which e-way bill is required from the same product, right? From the same product you will also be able to generate the invoice. Even if you say no, I want to even generate invoice on your platform, so you can again use Clear to even generate or create the invoice. So here itself you can even create invoice and then even generate the invoicing and the e-way bill. And if e-way bill is not required, you can even ignore that. And the same information will also be populated in your GST1, so that you can run the reconciliation for that even and go ahead and file your GST1 and 3B also. So which means the Clear have actually the entire solution where you can come generate invoice, you can generate e-invoicing, you can generate e-way bill, you can even go ahead and file with the same data, GST1, GST3, you don't have to do manual activity in doing everything, right? Because the bigger problem comes in that if invoicing is applicable to some sort of documents, right? It's only for invoicing, which is B2B and export. I have to keep on doing segregation. So we said, don't worry about that. You just push entire data. We'll auto segregate. After we do the auto segregate, we'll make sure, okay, for this document, IRIN is required, your IRIN gets generated. For this document, the e-way bill is required, your e-way will get generated. This document is required for the purpose of GST filing, so it will always push to GST1 filing. So everything will be done automatically rather than one by one, right? At the same time, if you also want to send the email from there itself, which means you want to send the entire emails to the customer also, that they also know that okay, IRIN has been generated, this is the normal invoice. So that can also be sent in a single click. So in a single click, you will be able to do the bulk mails to all of your customers so that you don't have to do one by one. At the same time, many days we have that, okay, I want to have my own format. I want to have my own print format. I cannot use some standard format. So you can even customize this entire print format. So we also give you a facility. So though we already have some standard format, you can always use that, make use of that. But if still you want, no, I don't want to use that. I want to have my own format because I already been using or following that. So you also have a functionality and the facility where you can even generate your own print template. So there is a functionality where you can do that. At the same time, if you want to see reports and all, right, you want to see, okay, what are the document again which IRIN is generated, what are the document again which e-way bill is generated, what are the pending documents. So you can even look into all the dashboards. So we also provide you the entire dashboard so that you can look into that. At the same time, you can even download this report in an Excel file which can be used for your future purpose. And if you don't want to mail directly, you want to just take a print of the invoices, so you can even take the print of the invoices from here itself. And at the same time, we also make sure that if let's say you don't want to directly do the integration with the ERP, but you want to have your own custom formats, right? You want that, okay, these are my custom information, you directly ingest that. I don't want to use your template, I don't want to use direct ERP integration, I want to have or send information in my own format. So that is also possible. So we also allow the user to have their own template and ingest there in the Clear portal and generate the IRIN against the same. So you can even do that. So that functionality is also available. At the same time, if something is not working, we also auto generate the entire thing. So these are some of the even value adds which we provide. We always make sure, obviously, the security is the bigger thing, and we always make sure there's a proper security over there. There is some reports which we always provide so that you can keep on looking that we have a customer support anytime. And we also make sure that there are hundreds of validations which we run so that there is nothing wrong, right? So you don't end up making a wrong invoice, because we at the same time know that the invoice should be correct, because there is a time period of cancellation, but that's just 24 hours, so it should be correct. So we also make sure that the invoice has been correct by running a lot of validation on top of the information which you send. So these are the certain key things, and we obviously have the quality, and we make sure there's a seamless integration with the different ERPs like SAP, Tally, Oracle, Microsoft, and even the custom ERP. So you can even have that. But even if you don't want to do the integration, but rather you want to use your own templates, you want to download some sort of report against that, you want to generate IRIN number. So that functionality is also available with us. So you can even use your own template. So these were some of the main features of Clear. And I would obviously say that you should come and in fact take a demo of the entire product and try on your own that how exactly your experience would be. So that, and I know that because we will not, because Clear in itself have their own IRP, so it's very easy for you to have a seamless experience without going to any place. And along with that, we do have certain MIS report. We also provide certain sort of reconciliation between different set of data, so you can always make use of all such things. So now let me take few queries which you are putting on the chat box so that it will be helpful to all of you. So, and this was some of the smart feature. You can always look into that. Anyhow, we'll also be sharing PPT. I know some of you have asked that if we can just share the PPT. Yes, definitely, we'll just share the PPT also. So let me look into the questions which you have. One question is from Subodhi, who is saying, let's say, so his question is, let's say till 31st July 2023, my turnover was less than 5 crore. However, it crosses threshold on 1st August. So we have to get invoicing from the same date? No. So Subodhit, you have to generate the invoicing from 1st April 2024. So you are required to generate the invoicing from 1st April 2024 because your threshold limit has crossed in the month of August. So since it happened in the month of August or maybe in the July, so in that particular case, you are required to generate the invoicing only from 1st of April 2024. Another question is from Ravindra, who is asking if credit note to B2B up to July invoice in future after invoicing applicable. So in that particular case also, Ravindra, you are required to generate the IRN number because today government don't have any linkage between the invoice and the credit note. So whatever the documents you issue from 1st August, right, you are required to generate the IRN again the same. Another question from Nilanshu is saying, say I do have a turnover of 3 crore, actual B2B plus B2C inclusive all branches, but due to stock transfer in my branch all over country, different GST number of around this, then would aggregate turnover be 3 crore or this point? So it has to be included. So that will be included for the purpose of the aggregate turnover. So whenever you are transferring the goods from one state to the another state, right, though it's a branch transfer, but that is also included in the definition of the aggregate turnover under the GST. So which means you have to include that, and if it exceeds that limit, then yes, you're required to generate the IRN number. Another question from Sonali is asking, can invoicing be generated on a single HSN as a composite supplier for project billing? Yes, Sonali, that can be done. So you have to just code that particular HSN and the invoicing will be applicable. One more thing, as we look into the e-way bill, right? E-way bill is required to generate only in cases of the goods, but that's not the case for the e-invoicing. E-invoicing has to be generated for both the goods and the services. So you don't have to make any distinction whether it's a goods or the services. Though in e-way bill, as we know, we can only generate for goods. But for e-invoicing, it is applicable for both the goods and the services. Another question from Mohammed, who says how to maintain the invoice sequence when we have both B2B. So Mohammed, you have to just make a proper CD. It doesn't matter whether it's a B2B or a B2C. You just maintain a proper CD. Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4. Which means some invoices are B2B, then you have some B2C. That does not matter. You just maintain the proper series as you do today also. Other questions from Umesh, who's asking, our company invoices are generated on Excel, then how can we generate invoicing? Umesh, you can, ClearTax have actually come up with a solution where you can even generate the invoicing through Clear. So you can use the Clear solution for generating invoices as well as the invoicing. Or you also have an option where you can directly ingest that Excel into ClearTax, and accordingly you can generate IRN number from here. Another question from Adip, who is saying, is it mandatory that we have to integrate Tally with e-invoicing portal? Can I generate e-invoicing on portal and issue to the client? Yes, Adip, you can even go ahead and generate the invoicing on the portal. So that is available. It's not always important to do the integration between the Tally and the portal. Another question from Nilanshu, he is asking, I manage business via marketplace like Amazon where they themselves create invoice for both B2C and a B2B document. So how to manage e-invoicing? So in that case, Nilanshu, if they are an e-commerce operator, right, they can always take a registration as an e-commerce platform and they can actually generate the IRN on behalf of you in respect of all of your B2B documents. So you just have to make sure they are doing that. If they're not doing it, in that particular case, you are required to generate the IRN in such cases. Another question is from SN, who is asking, do we need to raise manual invoice and invoicing on the same day of transaction? What will be the timeline for correction of invoicing? So SN, in respect to the correction, right, we have a 24-hour limit. So within 24 hours, we can cancel the invoice, whatever invoicing we have generated. But if we don't cancel the invoicing within 24 hours, the only option we are left with is that you raise a credit note for the same amount to nullify the transaction and then generate the IRN against the same. So that is what you can always do. But you cannot edit any invoice. So once the IRN has been generated, you cannot edit that particular invoice. Another question from Lavina is asking, can I generate e-invoicing in bulk? Yes, Lavina, you can even generate the invoicing in bulk. So that option is also available. Another question from Divya, who is asking, from 1st August mandatory for 5 crore. Yes, Divya, in case your aggregate turnover is greater than 5 crore, in such case, this e-invoicing is applicable to you from 1st August. Lalit is asking, can you please give me some introduction about Clear? Yes, Lalit, definitely. So see, Clear, obviously it's a business in the sense business where we do have certain products, which is a compliance product, whether it's a invoicing or e-invoicing or GST and in fact TDS, where you can come and maybe in fact generate this IRN number for the purpose of e-invoicing, file your GST return seamlessly. Obviously, there are a lot of features, so I would suggest you to take the demo of that and look into our end product, like how exactly we helps in making sure that you are able to generate this and do entire of your compliance seamlessly. Another question from Chintu is asking, can we generate e-invoicing through e-waybill login? No, Chintu, you cannot do that. So from the e-invoicing NIC portal, you can generate e-waybill and invoicing both, but from the e-waybill portal, you cannot do the invoicing generation. Another question from Srinivas who is asking, is there any chance to that once invoice is generated for credit note, but now we are unable to check that if it is e-invoicing? So what happens that whenever you generate IRN number, because you already have that information, so you can always look into that information whether the IRN number was generated against the document or not. Another question from Mohammed is asking, I'm using ClearText invoicing. Is that possible to integrate e-invoicing? Yes, Mohammed, you can always do that. If you're already using ClearText invoicing solution, so from there itself, you can also generate the IRN number. Another question from Umesh is asking, is it mandatory to print the IRN number on the tax invoice or we can attach the invoicing separately? No, Umesh, it's mandatory to have the QR code. So you should publish that QR code on the top of a invoicing using that. Looking into that, obviously that QR code always have the IRN number, so that will suffice the requirement. So I think I was able to cover most of your query, but still, and I'm just circulating one form, so you can maybe tell me if this webinar was even useful to you or not. So I've just circulated one poll on which can be seen in front of your screen. So if you try to just answer that if this webinar was even useful or not, and if there were certain improvements which was needed, so please feel free to add this on the feedback. So I'm just circulating one feedback form which can be seen again on front of you. So you can please provide the feedback on this, that how was this webinar and what all we can improve, what are the topic you're interested in. And if you need a demo of our Clear product, then please mail us at gstsupport@clear.in. So that's our mail ID. So you feel free to mail us over there so that we can even provide you the demo of the product. And at the same time, if you have any queries, right, which is still unanswered, then feel free to mail us at gstsupport@clear.in. So that's our mail ID. So we'll also happy to answer any of your queries in relation to GST or invoicing over there. And along with that, if I think most of the query I've already answered over here, but still if something is left, please mail us at gstsupport@clear.in. So that's our mail ID. With this, thank you very much. Thank you for attending the session and hope you like the session. And if I have not answered any of your query, please feel free to mail us at gstsupport@clear.in. So that's our mail ID. You can also mail me at surbhi@clear.in. So that's my mail ID. Thank you. Thank you very much. Another question from Lavina is asking, what is the time limit for generating e-invoicing? So Lavina, when it comes to invoicing, right, it's a very simple thing. Any invoice is not even a valid invoice unless it has a IRN number. So which means whatever you're generating a normal invoice, right, it's just a piece of paper unless it has an IRN number. So that is what we have to look into. So which means it has to be on the real time basis. With this, thank you very much.